and welcome to Community Dialogue presented by the Henry County Chamber of Commerce and proudly sponsored by Kaiser Permanente. I'm Christy Chewning, and today's theme is psychological safety, the key to innovation. When employees feel safe to speak up, ask questions, share ideas, and raise concerns, organizations perform better. We're joined by three outstanding guests to help us unpack this important conversation. I would like to introduce Keri Colson. Keri, if you would like to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning. Thank you, Christy.
Yes.
My name is Keri Colson. I am an HR business partner to VyStar Credit Union, which is an emerging credit union in the southeast of Georgia. You've probably seen some of our branches in Metro Atlanta, South Georgia, but we are very well known in the Jacksonville, Florida, and Central Florida market. I am also an HR coach and consultant for Guys Keri, GK HR Consulting.
Thank you, Keri. And we also have Dr. Paula Bloom. And Dr. Bloom, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. So happy to be here. I'm Paula Bloom. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and I'm the clinical director of behavioral health and wellness at Kaiser Permanente, Georgia. Delighted to be here.
Thank you. And rounding out our panel, we have Dr. Nancy Lewis.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Christy. I am Dr. Nancy J. Lewis. I am the president of Progressive Techniques Incorporated. And what we do is we do HR consulting, executive coaching, and a lot of leadership training, helping people learn how to play better in the workplace and get along better in the midst of all the constant change. So I get to go in and help change cultures and organizations and how people work better together.
Thank you. So today we're talking about psychological safety. And so in practical terms, what does psychological safety mean in today's workplace? And we'll start with you, Keri.
In today's workplace, it would mean a healthy work culture where employees feel like they have a safe environment to voice their concerns, their ideas, their creativity without fear of retaliation. Psychological safety also means that we provide resources for employees through EAP support, different coaching and consulting sessions, if you will, roundtables. But in a nutshell, it is a healthy workplace culture where employees have a voice, and there's a system in place to where they are heard and follow up and action is taken care of.
How about you, Dr. Bloom? What do you see as psychological safety?
Yeah. So I see psychological safety really as a leadership skill and not a personality trait or an innate part of the culture, right? It's something that has to do with moving people from fear, which completely blocks innovation because you're in survival mode, right? To a place of innovation, which means there's safety to use the parts of your brain that are needed for higher level thinking and collaboration. So I love what Keri said. I really agree with everything Keri said about what psychological safety is. I look forward to getting to talk about how we create it and what happens when we don't.
Dr. Lewis, how about you?
When you come kind of at the end, it's like a lot has been said. I mean, it is really psychological safety is really being able to come to work and bring your full self there, or as much as you possibly can without fear of someone judging you because you're different. Not dreading to come to work on Sunday night, because I have some friends who sometimes are going through difficult seasons where they're not excited about coming to work, and that's a bad place. But it really starts with leadership. Psychological safety starts at the top, but it's reinforced in everyday interactions. And that's what happens with leaders have to be able to do that. So it's basically creating an environment where the leaders are modeling it and people see it, but it's not just every now and then, it's a consistent behavior, and it frees people that are working for them to have the ability to share what's on their mind without fear of retaliation.
Yeah, so it sounds like that we're creating a workplace where people can actually perform, is
Yes.
what I'm hearing.
Yes.
And so, let's move on a little bit and talk about the fear that an employee has, that not wanting to go to work on Sunday evening. And, just really speaking really honestly, what are the signs that employees might not feel safe? Keri, if you want to answer that?
Yes, you will see a decrease in engagement. when it comes to engagement surveys, when we're trying to figure out how we're doing as a company, how we're doing as a leadership team, you will start to see decreased engagement. You will also start to see increased turnover and increased absenteeism. When employees do not feel psychologically safe to come to work, they don't want to show up in places where they don't feel like they have a voice. They don't want to voice opinions when they feel like they aren't being heard. In addition to that, it is also a morale issue. And so you can literally feel the tension when you're walking into some of these branches. And I'm only using branches because I support branches. When you're walking into some of these branches that have high turnover, decreased engagement and morale, and when I start asking questions, they literally start to dump because I'm the neutral party, that is able to listen to their concerns, their feedback, their ideas, etc., take note of that, and then bring it back to that leadership team to let them know our opportunities, our challenges, and how we can get better. But that is a telltale sign when you start to see increased absenteeism, when you start to see less engagement and participation, and you start to see attendance issues happening. People aren't wanting to show up because they don't feel safe.
Can I add something to that, Christy? Is that okay?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
I love what you were saying, and I think it's really important for people to recognize it's not really disengagement, it's self-protection, right? We think of it when we call it disengagement, right? I mean, that's what we might see. But if we think of it as people are trying to self-protect, right? What's burnout? Burnout starts as numbing because you have to protect yourself, right? And so I think that when we think about how we solve these things, thinking disengagement is what we see, but I think what's underlying that is people are self-protecting. And those interventions to address that is different, right? Than just people don't care, everybody's quiet quitting. A lot of times we put the blame on the employee. Like, you can't meditate your way out of a toxic culture, right? There's no like, I'm going to take a hot bubble bath, drink some green tea, and do some yoga. That's not a thing, right? And so a lot of times we put these things, and I think it is important to have benefits and wellness and all of these things, but still we have to acknowledge how many of these things are because of the system, and they're not. The onus is not specifically on the employee, but that's how those things often get communicated. I see that people are stressed. We've got these resources. Well, what about the system? What about the leadership? What about, anyway. So I just wanted to add that, Christy, kind of to the conversation, because we do hear disengagement a lot, and that's exactly what we see. But I don't know that that's a helpful way to then solve the problem.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah.
Paula. What I would also like to add is, you said something very key. When there's a breakdown in systems, when there's a breakdown in processes, they tend to want to blame the people. But I always advise my C-suite leaders and senior leadership that, in order for us to get productive people, we have to fix our processes. It's the 3 Ps. We have to fix our processes, and we have to fix productivity. You'll get higher productivity, but we don't start with the people. And that is so true. So thank you for bringing that point up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dr. Bloom, let's talk about that employee and what happens when mentally and emotionally when people have a fear-based environment. What's happening there mentally and
Yeah,
emotionally?
no, it's so important. So we can all agree that at some level we're animals, right? And everybody here knows about fight or flight, right? Like, if something's going on, to protect yourself, you're in like your reptile brain, right? There's fight or flight. Well, there's two more things that are added to that. It's fight, flight, freeze, and then this is the one that I think is important that people don't talk about: fawn. Right. So a lot of times when someone is scared, they may not shut down. They may just say, everything you're saying is great. Oh, that's a great idea. They're fawning. It's a way to protect themselves. Right. And so fear looks different ways in different people. And each of us has our own go to, right? Are you more of a fighter? Are you more of a flighter? Are you more of I'm going to freeze, And so thinking about people are trying to protect themselves, they feel unsafe, and they may go to one of these reactions. The good news is there's a fifth F, which is flocking for connection, flocking to others, right? Now, that often turns into a lot of gossiping and negativity and a lot of talking about we're united against the man, and so we have to be careful about that. But that sense of belonging and connection, we were talking about this with Dr. Lewis before this started, right? And, we talk about diversity, but it's important to talk about belonging. Belonging is really, really key and feeling a sense of connection. So anyway, just putting that out there, it's different on different people. But if you think about fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flock, the 5 Fs, that'll give you a sense of what that reaction might look like on different people.
I love that.
Yeah,
That is
that's
so
That
true.
good. That's good.
that's really good. Yeah, I really like that. Dr. Lewis, let's talk about the leaders and their behaviors. What leadership behaviors accidentally create fear or silence?
Those who basically shut people down when they have a comment, those who disagree. And it's my idea. It's like, anybody got another idea? As opposed to, do we have a different perspective? Leaders who who operate in total pride, who have no humility, who will not admit to when they make a mistake. They talk down to people. Recently, I had a situation where a colleague was telling me that a manager was so upset with an employee, they were yelling at the employee. And, so sometimes and again, people treat you the way you allow them to. So I always tell people, if you have a leader that is yelling at me, when I worked in HR, two things people could not do. You could not raise your voice at me, and you could not use profanity. Either one of those, I don't care who you were, the meeting was suspended. So I think people have to set some boundaries around what's respectful. We have all these things on the wall. In every organization, they have the mission, they have the vision, what they believe in, all those things. But many times the employees will say, that is a crock of mess. It is not real. So I think leaders don't listen to people. They don't actively listen. They don't try to create an environment where people want to come to work. It's their way or the highway. It's the fact that they will not admit when they make a mistake. They will pass the blame. And then it says it's the people. But no, everything starts at the top. The leadership sets the tone, what happens in their everyday interactions with the people, how they treat people, how they treat the janitor. We've heard it said, you treat the janitor like you do the CEO. But that is not real, because sometimes people, bosses, leaders they have their favorites that they basically will coddle and let get away with things. And then they have other people that they will chastise. So it is real in terms of the consistency. There's a lack of consistency of how they treat people. In terms of, some people get treated one way because they're my friend. We fish together, we golf together. Others don't get that. So it's the fact that you see behaviors that are not conducive to building trust, which is lacking, which breeds a whole another issue, because they don't have trust in the workplace. I don't trust you. Except innovation requires risk. Risk requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires psychological safety.
May I add to that?
Yes, Keri, go ahead.
Dr. Lewis, so true. One more thing that I would like to add is, when you have leaders that are making decisions in silos, they are not speaking to the population that it's going to impact. They're not giving them a seat at the table. And they're rolling out initiatives that we call change management with the lack of communication. And they're saying, and go, without giving people the time to adapt to the changes, even understand the changes, when they aren't giving the why behind the changes. In most situations I see, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Right? But they decide on their own, without putting all parties at the table to influence and make that decision that's going to be for the greater good of the organization. That is another way that, again, it creates an environment where people just feel as if, are we robotic? Right? Do we just go because you just told us to? And in a sense, what else can they do when that's their job and they don't have a choice? That's not a healthy culture.
And I'll just add one thing, because you got the different generations on top of that in the workplace. The 4 generations that are working, you got the boomers still there, you got the X there, you got the millennials, you got the Zoomers. Now the Alpha generation is the one, they've not started working yet, but that's the generation that's coming behind them. But these 4 generations approach, and what we've seen in terms of a lot of research I've done is that the generation millennials and Zoomers, specifically Zoomers, will not stay in a place long where there's no psychological safety. They will leave, and they will go out the door quick. Not just quiet quitting. No, they're quitting. So it's important to figure out, how do we leverage the generations to come to a place where we can value everyone, and they can bring their belonging and have a sense of belonging and want to be at work, because we all add something very unique to the work environment.
Yeah,
Inclusive.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that was a great transition into why psychological safety matters from a performance standpoint. So, why should business leaders care about psychological safety from a performance standpoint?
I just did something right before this meeting. I looked at something online. It says, current studies show psychological safety is a critical driver of performance, with high environments that do it well, 27% lower turnover and 40% higher innovation. That should be enough to make people want to create that environment with those stats.
Absolutely. Yeah. Dr. Bloom, what do you think?
Yeah. I wanted to add. So why should people care? Because until, there's this saying, right? That is basically, until you feel like somebody cares about what you have to say, you're not going to listen to what they have to say, right? Like, and so, one of the things that I think about is I think about, being imagine you're in a meeting room and there's a crack in the ceiling. And everyone sees the crack and nobody says anything. And it's like, okay, there's a crack. Everyone's feeling there's a crack. Like, people are worried about it. Nobody's saying anything. And then the leader says, do you guys see the crack? Like, there's this crack, right? And then everybody kind of relaxes and can focus on what they're talking about. Do you know what I mean? It's like this feeling. And so, from a leadership perspective, I think part of what affects performance, especially what you were talking about, Keri, with changes, right, is a sense of like what I call toxic positivity. No, I don't call it. I'm sure I've heard it. Toxic positivity, a lack of acknowledgement of what's difficult, a lack of acknowledgement of what's uncertain, a lack of acknowledgement of like, this is hard, man. We went through some changes and growth in here at Kaiser Permanente, and I lead the all the clinicians, the therapists and psychologists, behavioral health, and we did kind of a whole big change. And we started by just acknowledging the difficulty, right? Like, instead of pretending, okay, like you were saying, people are machines. And so I feel like productivity. I mean, we are humans. These are not robots. We are human beings, and no matter how introverted or extroverted, no matter how confident or not, people need to feel safe in
Yeah.
order to bring their best self, right? And their best self, I'm talking about innovation, the ability to talk across groups. If you feel very unsafe and very tribal, you're not going to open up and be able to get ideas from other people, right? And for me, productivity often is about removing the barriers that keep us from firing on all cylinders. And fear is a huge, huge barrier to firing on all cylinders, right?
Mhm.
People say, oh, if I keep people scared, I keep them motivated. Not for very long. It doesn't work.
No, it does.
Like, have you ever trained a child or an animal or like, that's like, so that is really, we are not in the ideal learning state because most of these jobs are higher level thinking, right? Like, it's not. And so we are not in our best state of mind to do that higher level work when we're in the lower parts of our brain because we're scared and we're in survivor mode. How do you get to innovative when you can't feel like you can survive?
That's right. Good stuff.
Yeah. Keri, anything to add to this?
I just believe that, managers can create trust by welcoming feedback, if you will, asking questions. We have to develop a level of curiosity instead of judgment and instead of correction. I see leaders, all the time. But again, when you're getting, conflicting messages from the top and the C-suite only cares about bottom line productivity and not necessarily how the people are doing as we're trying to be productive, you have leaders that are trying to drive and crack a whip for productivity, but you're not necessarily thinking about the people that are driving the productivity. And so if we do not take the time to ask questions, to be curious, because every employee is different, we are not, cookie cutter, if you will, like Dr. Lewis says, we have so many different generations in the workplace, right? And so we need to cater our messages to those audiences so they can feel inclusive and feel as if they have the power and are empowered to speak up, to offer suggestions, to offer ideas, and then implement some of those things. One of the things that I do not like to see is, we take these surveys, we do these roundtable discussions, and we do these focus groups, we jot down the notes, and then we go right back to doing business as usual. That does not work. And again, it creates more distrust after they participated and thought that they had a seat at the table, thought that they had a voice that would hear them if we are not going to follow up and do action plans. With no follow up and with no action behind it, what's the point?
People don't care what you say, they watch what you do. They
There you
don't
go.
people don't care what you say, they watch what you do. The example teaches. You can tell me all day long you value me as a person, but I tell people, as a certified emotional intelligence consultant, I tell people EQ is the secret sauce for leaders going from good to great. You must learn to emotionally connect with people that you serve at some level. I'm not saying you got to tell them all your business, but people are emotional beings. I don't care how strong you are still an emotional being, and people have to get to know people at the appropriate level with their emotions and to relate to them, not cookie cutter, but whatever you need for me to be successful. Does it take time? Absolutely. Is it worth it? Yes, because you have an engaged team, a team that's going to share ideas. Innovation will flow. People will stay longer. They're not coming there to retire anymore. They'll stay longer. But you got to create that environment. You have to learn the secret sauce of empathy and using it sincerely, not faking it, because people know when you're faking it. And if you're faking it, it will not work. So I tell people the secret sauce, if you really want to be able to connect through everything, emotional intelligence, EQ is the secret sauce to connect all the dots, period.
It absolutely is. When emotions are high, wisdom is low. And so you have got to be able to connect with people emotionally, right? Meet them where they are, if you will, and don't come with your own agenda. You have to come, being open and transparent. And again, that level of curiosity is so important because we can learn from one another. We need to talk with people, not talk at people, and not talk about people. Talk with them. This is a two-way street. This is not a monologue. This is a dialogue. And that's what is missing in some of the workplace cultures that are not healthy.
Christy, can I add one more thing? I know that we have a lot
Absolutely.
not a
That's
lot of time,
absolutely.
so I want to be respectful. But one of the things to remember too is that we are social beings, right? We have literally, like, if you think about it, if I go to drink some water right now, you might feel thirsty. You might start thinking about water, right? We have these things called mirror neurons where I needed water, so I figured out how to make an example out of it, right? So no, but I mean, we feel each other. We are social creatures. We have mirror neurons in our brain. One person yawns, somebody else yawns, right? Oh, that's contagious, right? But we are social beings and creatures. And thinking about what others think of us is not weakness. That is survival. We need it to survive, right? When I was talking about flock before, right? And so it's very important to recognize that, like somebody said here, it's the behavior that's modeled, but even if it didn't happen to you, if it happened to someone else, you can feel it yourself because we are social beings. So somebody else was humiliated in a meeting, right? You were listening or you even heard about it, you feel that in your body as if it happened to you for some of us, right? And so recognizing again, you can harness the power of the fact that we are social beings and use that to help create support and to improve productivity. There's a lot of different strategies that leaders can use, and complimenting people publicly who've done things that you like, reinforcing the behavior you like, not punishing what you don't like, maybe ignoring what you don't like, but really praising what you do like. What we all know as parents, as pet owners, as whatever, these things apply across the board to working with human beings. We don't have to take all of our knowledge and put it at the door once we're a leader, right? And so I think it's important to recognize the power of being social beings and how we can harness that, you know?
And
Yeah.
leaders don't have to have all the answers, because the problem is if you have all the answers, that's why you have a team. Leaders sometimes come in with all the answers. No, you need to pull, what is your team? No, especially those people that are introverts, because sometimes they have the greatest ideas, but you're not tapping into them and they don't feel safe. They're going to shut down. So I tell people sometimes when I have introverts in a class, I'll do what I call think, write, share. I'll give them a question. I'll let them think about it, let them write, then let them share. Because introverts have to process. They measure twice, cut once. They're not going to just blurt out. Extroverts, boom, they got something to say. But I want to get those ideas from the people that are sometimes silent forces that have great ideas. And in the workplace, leaders must begin to tap into those individuals sometimes that are not saying a whole lot, basically giving them an opportunity to have a platform, but it don't feel safe. Because again, you can be a disciplined leader, but you got to have some heart in the process of leading. You have to bring heart into the workplace and working with people. In today's workplace have changed. People coming back to work now after COVID. All these things, they don't want to be there. People come to work, they're sick. They're coming when they know they don't feel well. All these things are factoring in. People, as they tell me, we're lifing, Dr. Lewis, we're lifing. And so people are coming to the work lifing. So you have to take that in consideration. Everybody's going through something. You just don't know what it is.
Yes. So let's talk about real solutions and just, what is the one thing that a manager can do this week to start working and improving that psychological safety? And the question's for everybody. Keri.
Yes, because I just had this morning. I had an employee claim, toxic work environment, retaliation. It was unsubstantiated after I did my investigation, but it was important for us to all come to the table to acknowledge what happened. I think that's the very first thing that managers need to do. Acknowledge what happened, understand that it may have been a misunderstanding, that this was not your intent, if you will, but that's how the employee felt. I also think that we need to work on active listening. We need to listen before we respond. Oftentimes leaders, they have the answers or they think they have the answers, but they aren't really fully hearing the employee. They're listening to respond and not to listen to understand. In order to feel psychologically safe, people need to be understood. One of the worst feelings in the world is to feel misunderstood, right? So to acknowledge that, I also believe we need to communicate with transparency and visibility. Again, I talked about earlier, C-suite leaders or senior leaders making decisions in silos or in a vacuum and then rolling it out without thinking about the people who it's going to impact and influence. And then again, empower your frontline leaders. One of my favorite things to do so I can keep work off of my desk is to empower and strengthen the frontline leaders so they can continue to gain trust and credibility, right? If you keep saying, go to HR, what is that subordinate going to think about you as a leader, right? Also, to reestablish psychological safety. It is extremely important that we do that when it did not exist. And the last thing is to be patient and consistent. You will not shift a work culture overnight. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? It took us some years to get to this unhealthy place. It may not take years to undo it, but it is going to take time. So these are some of the few things that leaders can do and organizations can do in order to create a psychologically safe environment.
Dr. Lewis?
Keri gave so many of them, so it's like
I know, yeah.
she went down the list. I would say one thing also is to basically invest in your people, invest in people. Training leaders can begin to invest in them, learning how to become better, how to navigate through mental health challenges, how to do different things. So provide professional development training for them to be able to go to classes, because typically who gets training are the top leaders. They get lots of training, but sometimes they don't cascade it down to the employees who sometimes are doing it. So I think if you really care about your people, that's a retention tool now also, is giving training to people. We call them soft skills. They're not soft skills. They are essential skills because you need them for everything that you do. So I think actually creating a leadership, I have basically helped organizations create leadership development academies where you have a series of classes they can take for a period of time to develop their skill set, because a lot of the young people don't have the skill set around professionalism. They don't have the skill set about communication. So they need help in that area. You think because you know something, they know it. I said, stop expecting you from other people because they didn't grow up in your house. They don't know how you do things. So also bringing back the idea of curiosity, welcoming new ideas, welcoming people to challenge you, that even though you may disagree with them, but welcoming the people to challenge you, who give you feedback, and take that feedback with humility and walk in it. Be okay with someone saying, may I share my idea, and be honest enough to share that, creating an environment where trust and honesty are appreciated, celebrated, and not retaliated against.
How about you, Dr. Bloom?
Yeah, one small thing, openly admit a mistake you made and a lesson you learned, right? Wow, yeah, I pushed through that deadline without checking capacity. I am so sorry that I put that on you. Next time I'm going to take a pause and I'm going to ask, right? So like, I feel like this, there's a lot of big things we can do, but also recognize the leader is not the person who has the best gauge on whether the team feels psychologically safe. They're not the ones who are best at assessing that. You need to ask somebody else, right? Because it's like, I don't know. Yeah, sure, everybody feel right. Like there's a lot of, it's not a very, it's a pretty biased question, right? So number one is, you're not the one to best determine whether your team feels safe, right? There's other people that can help you figure that out. Number two, admit that you messed up and what you learned from it and what you're going to do. Simple, 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 right? Simple, not easy for many people, but just that acknowledging your own humanity. And they're like, I just did not. How many times, the amount of times when I get patients who say to me, oh my God, my boss has no idea everything on my plate. Like, okay, present everything you're doing and then ask them to help you prioritize, right? But a lot of times the boss is not aware of all the things, right, that people are doing. So anyway, admit your own mistake, the lesson you learned, and what you're going to do next time better. And ask people to hold you accountable if you don't do it.
That's right.
Great advice. Great advice. So, final question, and just give me a one sentence. What kind of workplace do people thrive in? And we'll start with you, Keri.
The workplace that people thrive in, I would say an inclusive culture. A diverse culture, if you will, where people feel that they are seen, valued, and heard. That is my superpower. And I drive that with each leader and team that I support. But people need to feel valued and heard in order to stay. And again, that contributes to their psychological safety. So it needs to be an inclusive culture where all ideas and creativity are being brought to the table or being open, and to welcome that feedback. Feedback culture is extremely important, whether we do it 360 survey or peer survey, an engagement survey, it's extremely important to be able to hear the feedback, identify those patterns and trends where our opportunities are, but to also take a look at our strengths and how can we sustain this, right? So again, about being inclusive, but also taking the time to pause and reflect and redirect if needed. I think sometimes, and I'll only speak for my organization right now, they are so aggressive with growth that they are forgetting about some of the things that we started in the beginning while you're out here trying to merge and acquire, other credit unions, if you will. Think about some of the processes that we started with in the beginning that are now starting to limp. We're limping through them. And you can tell because the turnover is starting to get high. These are things that we need to give attention to while you're so busy chasing money and bottom line. We need to slow down because now we're starting to have some growing pains. And again, we hear that, so we need to do something about it.
Dr. Lewis?
Well, I would say it's the point of where you have to basically create an environment where people can have healthy conflict. Because conflict doesn't always have to be when you're tearing each other apart. Is learning how to disagree in an agreeable fashion. I think it goes back to creating an environment where people feel respected, valued, and celebrated in terms of when you do something. Recognition is a critical piece, that recognizing people, we praise publicly, we criticize privately, recognizing those moments, those opportunities to basically tell people, I appreciate you. And sometimes I found when I worked in corporate, I would just take donuts in out of my own budget. I'd take pizza in, whatever I think they needed, not automatically, but when something had happened where I wanted to celebrate what they had done, I wanted to recognize them, and I didn't care if I had to pay for it. So sometimes you have to be willing to invest in your people to let them know, I appreciate you, I celebrate you, and I'm big on inspiration. So sometimes I will have like a thought for the week. I'll put stuff out there because we can't get too much inspiration in the world we're in today. There's so much negativity. How do we begin to focus on positive things? So I have a lot of my clients start their meetings now with positive. What's one thing that's positive happened to you in the last week? So people can change and shift the narrative, because we're focusing too much on the negative. Are those things real? Yes, but you set the tone, you set the order, you set the climate based on how you show up. And I think leaders have to show up with a positive mindset, being open to having healthy discussions that may not always be something they want to hear, and having the humility to recognize, as Dr. Bloom said, when you miss the mark, say, hey, I dropped the ball, it's on me. Have humility gains so much. When you are operating humility, it does wonders. It opens up the door for people to be honest and say, hey, if my boss can do it, I can do it too. So creating an environment where humility is celebrated, people feel valued, they can talk and share and just be their full self. That belonging culture is so critical. That's what I say.
Thank you. Dr. Bloom?
Basically, people thrive in workplaces where they feel safe to speak up, make mistakes, be themselves without fear of punishment or humiliation. Full stop.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our guests for joining us today, and thank you to our sponsor, Kaiser Permanente, for supporting community dialogue and conversations that strengthen our business community. Psychological safety is more than a buzzword, it is a business advantage. Thank you for watching Community Dialogue, and we'll see you next time.
Hello.